Welcome to chapter 2 of the book of First Nephi and the Book of Mormon. This week we're going to have some fun conversations about some concepts and ideas that are addressed in this chapter. One is the great journey that Lehi takes his family on and the historical context around that, as well as understanding some of the family dynamics that start to emerge as we start to get more personalities of the different children of Lehi. And so we're going to see some fun things to talk about in today's chapter. So let's get started. Verse 1. For behold, it came to pass that the Lord spake unto my father, yea, even in a dream, and said unto him, Blessed art thou, Lehi, because of the things which thou hast done, and because thou hast been faithful and declared unto this people the things which I commanded thee. Behold, they seek to take away thy life. So God is warning, he's congratulating Lehi, going, you are doing a good job of keeping the commandments. You've gone out and taught the people like I encouraged you to do. You're following the plan. You're doing good. But because you're following the plan, the people hate you. And they're plotting to take away your life. Now, this is an important thing to think about, because if we get into the book of Jeremiah, which Jeremiah is the main prophet in Jerusalem at this time, we learn some fascinating things about him, because the leaders sought his life. There is an experience recorded in ancient times in a thing called the Lachish letters. This is a fascinating part of history. There's a little town, not a little town, but there is a town that is a suburb of Jerusalem, or one of the cities outside of Jerusalem, that's the wealthy area. This is like the wealthy city next to the main metropolis city. This is where all the people live that are in the government. So Lachish is the name of the city. This is where they live. This is the fancy homes and things like that, gated community, stuff like that. And they worked and did the government stuff in Jerusalem, but they lived in Lachish. And because they lived around each other, they would talk and chat and do things together. So in this group of the wealthy class, the governmental influencers, the politicians, they banded together because they wanted to become more wealthy and powerful, and realized the best way to do that in their mind was to make a pact with Egypt. We talked about some of those things in last chapter. And so they wanted to get rid of Babylon and go with Egypt. Egypt was their largest trading partner. And so Egypt would be an easy way to say, look, Egypt can help us grow our wealth and power more. Let's partner with them. So the wealthy and the politicians banded together to go against them, forgetting the fact that the last king was deposed and Zedekiah was put in place solely because the last king was put in place by Egypt. And Zedekiah was put in there by Nebuchadnezzar's dad. So to be more pro-Babylon. But they're going to renege on that and go towards Egypt. So this is a problem, because as they have these secret plans of how do we engineer the thoughts of society and how do we do things to get out from underneath Babylonian rule, here comes Jeremiah, and he starts telling the people, guys, we need to learn how to play nice with the Babylonian overlords that are over us, just like we did with Assyria. We need to play nice. We need to follow their rules. We need to also keep the commandments of God and be kind and nice and do all those things that you're not doing. Well, this is a disruption to this plan, the secret plan that the politicians had. Therefore, they had to come up with ways to get rid of Jeremiah and the other prophets. This is discussed in this thing known as the Lachish letters. There is a guard outside the city of Lachish, and being a guard, your job is just to stand there and deal with people, that come and go from the city. So what he did was, while he was bored, he found a bunch of broken pottery called potsherds. And he wrote on these potsherds letters to his wife. We don't know if he ever actually mailed them, because the scholars found them in his guard station, basically, all together. But he'd write down like letters to his wife while he's on duty. Can't wait to get home and see you in a year, when my shift is done, my duty is done, or whatever. He ends up telling these stories to her about there was a captain in the guard who was the main messenger for the government to go back and forth between the wealthy and Lachish and the government and send messages back and forth. He was the carrier. Well, he was opening the king's mail and reading these letters and realizing what's going on, and he liked Jeremiah. And so he ended up leaking the information to Jeremiah that they're coming after you. You need to do something about this. And so that got to Jeremiah. So the Lachish letters validate this idea that the leaders did not like what these prophets are saying. And they had the people on their side. And we're going to see an interesting perspective of this play out between Laman, Lemuel, and Sam and Nephi as we go through the Book of Mormon. Verse 2, and it came to pass that the Lord commanded my father, even in a dream, that he should take his family and depart into the wilderness. And it came to pass that he was obedient unto the word of the Lord, therefore he did as the Lord commanded him. So they got out of town. The Lord's like, they're coming for you. It's just best if you leave town and aren't here. So let's talk about this idea of going out into the wilderness. Some people have looked at this and thought, why would God make them go out in the wilderness? Why couldn't they just protect them before, during the destruction or other things like that? I want to share some ideas on this. Hugh Nibley had an idea in his book, An Approach to the Book of Mormon. He said in 1 Maccabees, chapter 2, verse 29, which was written about 175 BC. If you're not familiar with this book, 1 Maccabees is a book considered kind of a non-canonical book of scripture, if you will. It's a part of Jewish history, basically. It's kind of Old Testament, late Old Testament, not late, I should say, young Old Testament philosophy. But it's not in the Old Testament. It's written after the Old Testament books we have were written, long after them. So we are told that at the time, many who were seeking after righteousness and judgment went down into the desert or wilderness to settle with their children and their wives and their property, being sore oppressed by the evils of the time. So this was written 175 BC. So Lehi, of course, is around 600 BC. But we still see, even in this book of Maccabees, that there were people who were saying, I'm not willing to follow what's in Jerusalem. I'm going to go out. So I'm going to leave. We're going to get out of town and go in the wilderness. In fact, he says, in the Dead Sea Scrolls, we have the contemporary records of just such a community. Another such were the Ebionites, who from their teachings have the particular appearance, even as the Dead Sea people and Lehi's own community do, of being both Christians and Jews at once. From the Talmud, we learn that any Jew was free to take the Nasir oath that bound him to observe the severe and simple ways of Israel in the wilderness, a way of life that never ceased to appeal to individuals and groups. So the concept of this is the idea that this was common. The thought that I don't like how things are going in Jerusalem, I'm going to go live a more ascetic lifestyle of my religion, maybe even a more mystic concept of my religion, and so I'm going to leave Jerusalem and go out into the desert to do this myself, was not an uncommon thing. Probably one of the more common stories of this comes from the idea of a man by Jonadab Rechab, who's about this time, in fact. Hugh Nibley talks about this in another article. He says, in the time of Jeremiah, or shortly before, a certain Jonadab ben Rechab had led a colony of permanent settlers from Jerusalem into the wilderness, where his descendants survived through all succeeding centuries as the strange and baffling nation of the Rechabites. What makes them baffling is, so just to give you an idea, okay, so this is probably somewhere between 700 and probably around 750, honestly. And no, excuse me, we're counting down. So probably like 750 to 701, or I'm trying to think. I got my dates messed up, I think. Yeah, 750 to 701. We're around the 700, late 700s, basically. This is a possibility that, because remember, this is around 600. Actually, if we're counting down, then it would be like 650-ish time frame. Probably 700 to 650 time frame is more likely. Actually, that makes more sense. Um, so this is probably several decades at least before Lehi that Jonadab Rechab did this. He's a gentleman. He had some wealth, and he decided basically the Jewish community is no longer following the true faith. I'm going to take me and my family and anybody who wants to follow me, and we're going to go out and live a nomadic life. We're going to sell all of our stuff. We're going to live off the land, which means you're in the desert living off the land, and we're going to spend our days worshiping God and following what we think is the more true religion instead of what they're doing in Jerusalem. This was a very successful group. They became known as the Rechabites after Jonadab Rechab. Rechabite became a derogatory term over time because people saw them as religiously zealot people. Sometimes they think that these Rechabites could have been the precursors of the Essenes, that possibly even were persecuted by the Romans at Masada, and even possibly wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls, put all those together. So there's a lot of possibilities that the Rechabites play a bigger role in ancient antiquity than we think. Even though most people have never heard about them, but they went out into the wilderness and lived for centuries in a nomadic lifestyle to worship God in a better way. So this idea of Lehi doing something similar is not an uncommon theme. But Hugh Nibley continues on in here, and he says, what makes them baffling, these Rechabites, is their messianic religion, which is so much like primitive Christianity in many ways that it has led some scholars to argue that those people must have been of Christian origin, though the historical evidence for their great antiquity is unquestionable. Now, what Hugh Nibley is saying here is these are people who lived a Christian-like lifestyle before Christ was born, before Christ even taught his gospel. I realize, again, these guys are 700 to 650 BC. Christ is born around 3 BC. So several hundred years, 500 to 600 years before Christ, these people are following philosophies that are Christian-like in nature. Says here, when one considers that Jonadab's project was almost contemporary, perhaps slightly prior to Lehi's, that his name, ending in Adab, is of a type peculiar of the period and to the Book of Mormon, and that the Book of Mormon specifically states that the Lord had led other people out of Jerusalem beside Lehi, and that the Rechabite teachings are strangely like those in the Book of Mormon, one is forced to admit at very least the possibility that Lehi's exodus could have taken place in the manner described, and the certainty that other such migrations actually did take place. When the great Nabatean kingdom arose after the fall of Jerusalem, it absorbed among other people of the desert the Idumeans, Arabic-speaking nomads who thought Jews by religion, who were though Jews by religion since the time of Hyrcanus, to a large extent continued to live like Arabs according to their former customs, and they undoubtedly served as a medium whereby the tribes of Arabia were brought into contact with the Hellenistic world over which the Jews were spread. Certainly they show how extensively the tribes of Arabia had been brought into contact with the Jewish world and religion in the preceding centuries. So there were people that lived even before the time of Lehi that went out into the wilderness to live their religion. And had played a role in some of these ancient antiquities. There was another quote here. This one's also by Hugh Nibley, his book Approach to the Book of Mormon. He says, Caseman begins his remarkable study of the Christian community of ancient times as God's people wandering in the wilderness by observing that a state of homeless migration is the normal manner of existence of those who are the bearers of revelation. The early Christians, he says, regarded themselves as wholly led by revelation. For them, everything is directed from the other side. Their whole life is oriented towards the Angelia, the promise which is the goal of their journeyings, their life and mission on earth, was for them a confident journeying from a heavenly past to a heavenly future. Or, in the words of the Apostolic Fathers and the Dead Sea Scrolls, the way of light is out of one eternity and into another. Caseman further notes that this way through life was one set out in God's plan from the beginning of the world, and though its continuity has been broken by the wickedness of man, God constantly restores it to the earth by his word, as at the beginning. By this way, the saints must walk while they are in the earth, their life here beginning in apodemia, both figuratively, as in the Jewish philosopher Philo, and literally, i.e., a temporary sojourn in a strange land. Such being the case, the journey in the wilderness is, in the primitive Christian view, God's special way of training and educating his people. As they travel through the wilderness, they are led and sustained by revelations from on high, exactly as Alma describes it. Yet they are also given an earlier earthly leader who is properly designated as the high priest. Like the earthly Hebrews and the later Jews, the first Christians thought of themselves as walking in the ways of their spiritual ancestors, a band of homeless saints passing over the earth in search for their heavenly home. Some fascinating ideas that we get out of this. So this is a common theme that we see in the ancient world of people leaving to go practice what they think is a better version of their religion, basically. All right, well, let's jump into verse 4. And it came to pass that he departed into the wilderness. He left his house and the land of his inheritance, his gold and his silver, and his precious things, and took nothing with him, save it were his family and provisions and tents, and departed into the wilderness. So they left valuables. That is really interesting to think about, because why would you leave your precious stuff behind? Because if you thought, oh, we're gonna interact with other people, we want valuables to buy goods and do things. If you're not taking your valuables, you're probably assuming you're not going to run into other people. You're not going to be going from city to city. You're not moving from one city to another city. You're going out where there's nobody. You're going to be out in areas where the average person would never go. So they're not planning on needing to carry gold and silver with them, and so they're leaving them. And maybe that was a spiritual problem, because they do play a role later on in this story here in a couple of chapters. So in the time of Jeremiah, or shortly before, I just read that story about Jonadab, Rechab. This was, I think, that same quote. So in here, when we look at this, again, he's taking provisions, so it's food and supplies. He's taking tents, which is shelter, and they left. They took what they need to live, not to barter and exchange, but to live and to take care of themselves. So verse 5, and he came down by the borders near the shore of the Red Sea. So this might mean that they are nearing the borders of the empire. When he talks about came down by the borders, following the borders of that Babylonian empire where Egypt and Babylon come together, kind of following that direction down towards the Red Sea. Babylonians had recently taken over the area from the Assyrians. And what's nice is there's a possibility that staying inside Babylonian-controlled area maybe gave them an advantage against marauders or other people out in the desert, because the Babylonian kingdom would have said, we're not going to tolerate some of these things. And so they maybe have already been through and wiped out some of those areas and made it a little safer for travel. So staying inside those borders maybe gave them an advantage until they got down by the Red Sea, where they were getting out of that border and would be more on their own. So that's possibly what happened. So now he's down there, and it says, and he traveled in the wilderness, in the borders which are near the Red Sea. And he did travel in the wilderness with his family, which consisted of my mother, Sariah, my elder brothers, who were Laman, Lemuel, and Sam. So Nephi is the youngest. So for many centuries, the richest trade route in the world was that which ran along the eastern shore of the Red Sea for almost the entire length of the Arabian Peninsula. This is the route that Lehi took when he escaped from Jerusalem, and even his skeptical family seemed to think that he knew what he was doing. Not only the wealth of the Indies, but even the more fabulous wealth of Africa passed through the souks of Saba or Sheba to Europe and the Near East, and from very early times the Israelites were in on the trade. Commercial relations with Yemen, which is the southwest corner of Arabia, begun in biblical times, were later strengthened by Jewish merchants residing in Babylonia and trading with Sabia and Abyssinia. A succession of great Arab states controlled this trade, which grew and grew rich on it. Manaeans, Sabians, Katabians, Hadramautians, and Himarites, succeeding one another to monopolistic control of lucrative trade routes over which the riches of Asia and Africa flowed into the eastern Mediterranean seaboard. There is strong philological evidence that the trade of South Arabia with Palestine and the Mediterranean was very old indeed. But in Lehi's day, something happened that virtually put an end to the lucrative land transport between the two regions. Exactly what it was that caused the Arabic center of gravity to shift from the south to the north, we do not know, though it is now maintained that it may have been the discovery of the monsoon winds, enabling shippers to bypass the South Arabian ports. At any rate, the great Arab merchant states in the south gave way to the greatly reduced activities of the Mukarribs, independent merchants who closely resembled the Greek traders in the west, with whom, in fact, they entered into extensive negotiations through Sidon and Tyre. Along with this, there took place in Lehi's day a general shift of business and population from south to north Arabia, where Jewish settlers and merchants lost the economic advantages which they had long enjoyed in those regions. As early as the 7th and 6th centuries BC, Ammon and Moab received a large influx of desert Arabs who at the same time were moving into Gaza and the Negev. In the 5th century, all the latter region became Nabatean country. The Nabateans, being an Arab merchant state which by the end of the century had become a great empire, even participating in the struggles among the Greek cities for economic control of the islands in the Mediterranean. At the same time this kingdom was founded, the sons of Lehi's contemporary Nebuchadnezzar founded Tema on the north edge of the Hejaz as a royal residence, since he obviously realized its great importance on the converging North and South Arabian trade routes. In the Old Testament, with abrupt suddenness, the word Arab suddenly appears in the literature in Jeremiah and Ezekiel, never to vanish again. Jeremiah and Ezekiel, it will be recalled, were contemporaries of Lehi. Even the enterprise and aggressiveness of the Phoenicians and Syrians, which gained them economic control of the whole Mediterranean, failed. Edward Mayer observes, even to pose a serious threat to the Arabs' control of the caravan trade, any great power that wanted to trade over the deserts had to buy their cooperation, and though the price was high, it was infinitely cheaper than the military conquest and occupation of an all but uninhabitable wilderness half the size of the United States. That was another comment that Hunibli made. So this is really they're down here by the Red Sea. So they're following, there's a good chance Lehi knew about these Arab trade routes. He knew what he was doing in moving down this direction. He understood what was going on. And so his family's like, okay, we're going on this journey. Lehi was a merchant. He had been on these trade routes. He had done this before. So they're probably surprised that they've left so much wealth and things behind, because they probably took some of that with them to buy goods in the other towns. But he's like, no, where we're going, we're not going to need any of that. So they're like, okay, well, but let's go on this journey and let's get out here and see what's going on. And again, if we think about this, Laman and Lemuel's names come from more Arabic origin. Sam and Nephi are more Egyptian in origin, showing the change. We can almost reflect some economic changes in Lehi's merchant business during his lifetime by looking at the naming convention of his sons. In fact, speaking of these names, another quote, Hunibli had a lot of quotes. He wrote several books on the Book of Mormon and did a lot of research, so he's got a lot of good stuff to work from. He says, the most striking thing about the names of Laman and Lemuel is the way they go together. As we saw above, as it has been suggested, and we talked last chapter about this in the last video, that the former is but a corruption of the latter. Whether that is so or not, the musical pair certainly belong together and are a beautiful illustration of the old desert custom of naming the first two sons in a family with rhyming twin names. A pair of pendant names, as Spiegel puts it, like Eldad and Medad, Hilek and Bilek, Jannes or Jambres. The Arabs particularly seem to enjoy putting together such Uh, Assonant names Yagug and Magog for Gog and Magog, Haram and Karam for Aaron and Korah, Habi and Habil and Kabil for Abel and Cain, Hillet and Millet for the first dwellers in hell. Spiegel is here discussing the names Heya and Abeya, and might well have included in his parallels the recently discovered romance of Sul and Shumul. Harut and Marut were the first two angels to fall from grace, like Laman and Lemuel, according to Arab tradition of great antiquity. These names never go in threes or fours, but only in pairs, designating just the first two sons of a family, with no reference to the rest. This dioscuric practice has a ritual significance which has been discussed by Rendell Harris. But the actual practice itself, especially among the desert people, there can be no doubt, for we read in an ancient inscription, En built this tomb for his sons, Habit and Hamelat. One could not ask for a better illustration of this little known and until recently unsuspected practice than we find in the Book of Mormon, where Lehi names his first two sons, Laman and Lemuel. So this is an interesting idea of Laman and Lemuel being having similar roots and corruptions of each other, basically, and how there's research that's been done that shows that this is a common nomenclature for Arab groups to name the first two sons similar names. And fascinating that the Book of Mormon follows this naming idea that we didn't even know till the 1940s and 50s that even existed. What's fascinating is the name Laman actually can be found in antiquity. The name Laman, or LMN, because you used your consonants, but vowels were added later. The name LMN is found among the inscriptions. Thus, in an inscription from Sinai, "Greetings, Laman, son of Abdal." Recently, the name Laman has turned up in South Arabia and been held by the discoverers as a new name. In an inscription reading, Lamai, son of Naphia, erected this monument. The final yod is defective and suggests that the word really is Laman. In Palestine, the name of Laman is attributed to the ancient Mukam, or sacred place. Most of these Mukams are of unknown dates, many of them prehistoric. In Israel, only the tribe of Manasseh, the tribe that Lehi is from, built these. So this is fascinating that Laman and Lemuel are close together, and Laman connects with ancient religious places, these shrines and things that were built. That Lehi would have understood and known about. So maybe he's trying to also use this naming to encourage his sons to be followers of God, to help them along, basically. And that these are common in Arab communities. So really fascinating stuff. All right, so verse 6, let's continue on. And it came to pass that when we had traveled 3 days in the wilderness, he pitched his tent in a valley by the side of a river of water. And it came to pass that so this is, if we look at this, he is in here. So here's something that's really interesting, is that this is another evidence that's interesting about the Book of Mormon. This idea of camping by a river of water. This is an interesting quote here. 2 more evidences that the Book of Mormon is translated literature are found in 1 Nephi 2, 6, and 7. First, in many parts of the world, any river is a river of water. But in the Middle East, year-round rivers are scarce. During the winter rains, thousands of wadis, or dry stream beds, also become rivers. In the months when it does not rain, these wadis would not be rivers of water. Second, Lehi's building an altar of stones is in direct obedience to a commandment found in Exodus chapter 20 and Deuteronomy 27. So we see this idea of a river of water. If you remember in verse 5, they came down to near the borders of the Red Sea. So the sea is there. The sea is the lowest area. Water runs downhill, so the sea is the lowest area. So if they're by a river of water, this is probably a river running into the sea. And because we're in the Arabian Peninsula area, that's a very big desert, this is most likely a wadi that is running water in from other places, so a flash flood type concept. So they could be in an area where this wash is full of water. So that gives us some indications of time of year, probably more winter time, easier, more wet time frames for this area. And in verse 7 he says, "And it came to pass that he built an altar of stones and made an offering unto the Lord and gave thanks unto the Lord our God." Like mentioned, that's a common thing from Old Testament times of putting this together. Now, everywhere the Jewish merchants clung to their religion with great tenacity and often tried to press it on others, earning in the Roman world the epithet of proselytizing Jews. The international contacts developed by the language of trade, writes Gowen, afforded the Jew a marvelous opportunity for becoming the great missionary of monotheism. Speaking specifically of the later Jewish merchants in Arabia, Wecher writes, "Though developing their own culture and social patterns, they kept in close touch with Babylonian and Palestinian Jewries, but especially with the Tiberian center." And he quotes Hirschberg, "The documents and sources testify that Arabian Jewry did not differ from that of other lands. They lived in accordance with accepted Jewish tradition. The first, being a Hebrew merchant, would do upon settling down in a place, even for a limited stay, was to set up an altar, exactly as Lehi did at his first important camp. It is to be assumed without question the settlement of Israelite merchants, such as those at Damascus, had an altar that stood on Israelite earth. Without such, it would have been impossible to live after the manner of Israel." That's another quote from Hugh Nibley. So all of this is here to show this is normal. This is normal behavior for people like Lehi to be there. So he builds an altar. He makes an offering on this altar. Nothing out of place in this, basically. In fact, this is common among these nomadic Bedouin tribes and other groups as well that we see this often happening. Now, verse 8 is an interesting one. "And it came to pass that he called the name of the river Laman, and it emptied into the Red Sea." So there we go. The river is now coming into the Red Sea. It's probably one of those washes or wadis that's full of water coming out. "And the valley was in the borders near the mouth thereof. And when my father saw that the waters of the river emptied into the fountain of the Red Sea, he spake unto Laman, saying, Oh, that thou mightest be like unto this river, continually running into the fountain of all righteousness." So it's not uncommon for people to name places as they travel. In fact, this is sometimes a problem in the ancient world because one group of people names everything what they think, and another group of people names the same thing something different. And so we have to look at their maps and compare and go, oh, this is what they're talking about. They're not talking about two different places, just renaming the same place. Sometimes that would happen. But Lehi is using this as an opportunity to teach his oldest son a gospel lesson, or a spiritual lesson, basically. So another interesting quote here that says, while Lehi lived, he was the sheik, of course. He's the patriarch of the family, the oldest man, and the relationship between him and his family as described by Nephi is accurate in the smallest detail. With the usual deft sureness and precision, the book shows Lehi leading, not ruling, his people by his persuasive eloquence and spiritual ascendancy, while his murmuring sons follow along exactly after the manner of Philby's Bedouins, an undercurrent of tension in our ranks all day. Great difficulty to appease their evil, envious souls. We left Suayak, says Burton, all of us in the crossest of humors. So Burton is the scientist that went with a bunch of Bedouins on some of their journeys and realized how hard that life is. And at some point, I mean, you're just dealing with the same people all the time. You're going to get on each other's nerves, like a road trip. With this is a road trip. Would be kind of a modern day perspective of this. He says, all of us in the crossest of humor, so out of temper were my companions, that at sunset the whole party, Omar Effendi was the only one who would eat supper. The rest sat upon the ground, pouting and grumbling. Such a game as naughty children I have seldom seen played even by Oriental men. So this is, again, it's not uncommon for, like in a road trip, you get your family together and you kind of hate each other by the time you get to the destination, or you're barely tolerating each other. Bedouins, these nomadic groups, experience something similar, basically. Now, one thing I want to point out in here is he talks about a fountain of the Red Sea. Now, we think of fountain, we think of water, like a water fountain or spring coming out. Hugh Nibley wondered about this too. He says, is the Red Sea a fountain? For the Arabs, any water that does not dry up is a fountain. Where all streams and pools are seasonal, only springs are abiding, water that never runs away or rises and falls and can therefore only be a fountain. This was certainly the concept of the Egyptians from whom Lehi may have got it. So this idea again of the Red Sea doesn't go away. So there's got to be a source of water continually feeding it. Because everything else in the Arabian area, like that river that they're camped next to, goes away. It rains, the waters pool together, and it runs off. Have you ever been to a place like southern Utah or Grand Canyon area, Arizona? You have a lot of the red rock and things where the water doesn't absorb into the ground. It runs off and starts slowly collecting and then creating a torrent of water that runs down and then goes away. And then you might not have it anymore for a long time. It's not a continual amount of water. It's not a spring that's continually running. It's only when it rains, then the waters run by. And as soon as the waters are done running by, they're done. It all dries up. So that's what he's talking about here, is this fountain of the Red Sea, meaning the Red Sea doesn't disappear. It doesn't go away seasonally like a lot of the rivers do. So there's got to be something supplying it. So there's got to be a fountain, an origination for it, even though the Red Sea is part of all sea, all ocean, basically. But this is a common idea. So he's trying to use this idea of all this water running into the fountain, saying that the sea is like the key function. It's the original source of water, and this water rushing down to it is a secondary source that's finding its way back to the original source. And so that's what this kind of a water cycle we would think of. But Lehi's using this as a teaching opportunity to encourage his son Laman to return to the source of truth, to come to God, the originator of the fountain of truth, basically. Now in verse 10, he gets into a similar idea with his son Laman. And he also spake unto, Lemuel, "O that thou mightest be like unto this valley, firm and steadfast and immovable in keeping the commandments of the Lord." So now he's using this idea of this big valley that they're in, that this water's rushing down to, firm and steadfast. So maybe we could say something about Laman and Lemuel from these analogies. That maybe Laman is making bad choices. He's moving away from God. Maybe Lemuel is questioning his faith, having a faith crisis, struggling, seeing what his dad wants everyone to do, but watching what his older brother Laman is doing, and is kind of caught in between there and is unsure of himself. So we could look at this and go, maybe we can learn about Laman and Lemuel from these analogies here. Verse 11, let's see. Yeah, let's do verse 11 here. "Now this he spake because of the stiff-neckedness of Laman and Lemuel. For behold, they did murmur in many things against their father, because he was a visionary man, and had led them out of the land of Jerusalem, to leave the land of their inheritance, and their gold and their silver and their precious things, to perish in the wilderness. And this they said he had done because of the foolish imaginations of his heart." So not everybody's excited about going along with this plan. Laman and Lemuel are clearly not happy about the plan. And this is the first time we get to hear of their dissatisfaction with what their father is doing. Now they're not disobeying their father and being like, "Nope, you guys go. We're gonna stay. We're gonna stay here in Jerusalem." They're following their father. This is part of this, I think, goes back to the culture of the tribes. The idea of you don't defy the family patriarch. That's important. You don't defy him. If you defy him, you lose your inheritance. You're out. So he has a lot of control over your future. So you don't want to defy him. That would be rude and inappropriate. And so that could be part of why Laman and Lemuel are going along with this, even though they're bickering and complaining the whole time about it. But they're not happy. They don't see what their father has seen. They haven't experienced what their father has experienced. And they're looking at it from their perspective, from their own way of thinking, saying, this doesn't make sense to my way of thinking. Why are we doing it this way? What's going on? So Nephi's description of his brothers is a serious indictment and shows just how hardened Laman and Lemuel had become. Note the spiritual power Lehi had and the source and key to Nephi's greatness. So we're going to see this more as we get moving forward about this contrast between Laman and Lemuel and Nephi. And Sam is in there. He's more on the side of Nephi, but he kind of gets, even though he's older than Nephi, he just gets kind of tagged along basically. But again, being in these Bedouin camps, you've been out together, you're always around each other. It's not uncommon to start disliking each other and having problems with each other, like we've just read about. So these people Laman and Lemuel are murmuring, not believing that their dad is being led by God. They think their dad's gone a little crazy. Verse 12, and thus Laman and Lemuel, being the eldest, did murmur against their father, and they did murmur because they knew not the dealings of that God who had created them. Again, they're not following on the same spiritual level as Lehi, and they're not taking an opportunity to try to understand it. They're looking from their perspective at their father's information. So this is a good thing for us to always think about too, is as we look at stuff in our life, sometimes things don't make sense. Doesn't mean they're not true if they don't make sense. It means we maybe don't have the right perspective to understand them, and somebody else does. This is why collective revelation in councils is so important. So this is not an uncommon thing. We see this all the time in society. One person thinks it's a good idea, other people don't think it's a good idea. They both think they're right, and they both might be right to an extent. So we have to understand that just where they're coming from. They have a difference of opinion. They're not trying to understand their dad. They're trying to evaluate their dad from their own perspective. That's where the problem lies, is they're not trying to understand their dad. And that's what Nephi does differently that we're going to see here. In fact, verse 13, continuing on to talk about the complaining that they do, neither did they believe that Jerusalem, that great city, could be destroyed according to the words of the prophets. And they were like unto the Jews who were at Jerusalem, who sought to take away the life of my father. So Laman and Lemuel agreed with the people in Jerusalem that Jerusalem is a great city. It's too great. It can't fall. We are God's people. We're doing the traditions of our fathers, i.e., following our religion. We're acting religious, but aren't truly believing it. But they follow the perception of the people in Jerusalem, which they agree that this talk of staying away from Egypt and playing nice with the Babylonians is a horrible idea. So they have a difference of politics, Laman and Lemuel, from their dad on these subjects as well. Hugh Nibley had an interesting comment on this. He says, throughout history, the determining factor of what makes one a Jew has always been some association with the geographical area of Judea, since Lehi dwelt at Jerusalem in all his days. The best possible designation for him is Jew, regardless of his ancestry. Nephi's formula, the Jews who were at Jerusalem, which is what he's talking about here in verse 13, makes it perfectly clear that he was acquainted with other settlements of Jews, and in his use of the term, one may detect an undeniable feeling of detachment, not of hostility toward those city Jews. The Lachish letters distinguish between the Jews of the country and the Jews of the city, and this distinction is found in Nephi's account as well. So that's this idea of he's like, Laman and Lemuel are following the city Jews, not the country Jews. We come from the country, and we're the ones going out into the nomadic world. It's a different perspective, different opinion of how to do things. That's very different from what the city Jews believed. A lot of the country Jews, when Babylon decides to come down and take out Jerusalem, they see the army coming and they go, no, we're out. We're moving. We're getting out of here before we get taken over. The city Jews hunkered down in the city and were sieged by Babylon and were heavily destroyed. We're going to talk about that as we get closer to that time period. So verse 14, and it came to pass that my father did speak unto them in the valley of Lemuel with power, being filled with the Spirit, until their frames did shake before him. And he did confound them, that they durst not utter against him, wherefore they did as he commanded them. This is a really interesting experience that Lehi has. They're complaining to him. He gets the feeling of the Spirit so strong with him that his words are so powerful that Laman and Lemuel are shaking, like they're afraid, they're nervous, they're shaking from this conversation with their father that they're having. Was this an argument? Was this kind of trying to prove who was right? We don't know. Is this just the sheer power of the Word of God in affecting them? We don't know. Those are options. Those are possibilities of what's there. But this is an experience that Laman and Lemuel have several times, unfortunately, and don't seem to learn from, unfortunately. Now, verse 15 is a really fascinating verse. Okay, this is the shortest verse in the entire Book of Mormon. And my father dwelt in a tent. You might look at that and go, okay, what the heck does that mean? Of course you're in a tent. You just told us a few verses ago you took your tents and your provisions and you went out into the wilderness. So we assume you dwell in a tent. You don't take a tent camping not to use it. You don't go sleep on the ground. Oh yeah, I have got a tent, but I'm just going to sleep on the ground. You brought the tent for a reason. So what is going on with this? This seems like an obscure fact to put in here that seems pointless. I mean, really, a lot of people I think look at this and go, "This is dumb. This is kind of a pointless verse." A lot of the authors in the Book of Mormon complain, and we're going to see this as we continue on, complain about not only how hard was it to write on these metal plates because of the awkwardness of their hands and their writing tools, but they had limited space. So why would they put the effort into writing this verse, and my father dwelt in a tent? What's the point of that? Why is that even there? What's interesting about this is you have to go back to some ancient traditions, back into the time of Moses. You see, in the time of Moses, there was the wandering tabernacle. This was a large tent that God could dwell in, that people could commune with God through, basically. So when these nomadic tribes would go out to live their religion out in the wilderness or the desert areas, they oftentimes had a tent for worship, like patterned after what the roving tabernacle of Moses had. Because in Jerusalem, since the time of King Solomon, which is way before this, they've had a physical temple. That's about to be destroyed here with the destruction of Jerusalem is the end of the first temple period. So they have an established temple, but this is a wandering temple because the people don't want to go back to Jerusalem to worship, so they worship in their camp. So when it says here, my father dwelt in a tent, a lot of people believe that what Nephi is trying to tell us is that Lehi had a place of worship where he worshiped God in the camp. And that was usually connected to the tents so that he had that. So his father dwelling in a tent means his father is regularly spending time in this wandering tabernacle, seeking the will of God to understand what God wants them to do. So this is more of a spiritual phrase than it is a literal phrase. So think about that. Next time you see this, just realize when they talk about living in a tent, oftentimes they're using this as a spiritual connotation. We have a wandering chapel, if you will, where we can seek solace, we can seek instruction. This is the tent we teach Sunday school out of. This is the tent we worship God in. This is where we put our shrines or whatever, our sacred artifacts and stuff goes in this tent. This is a tent for sacredness that these nomadic groups would use. I believe that's what, and a lot of other scholars think of the same idea, that's why Nephi took the time to put that in there. All right, verse 16, and it came to pass that I, Nephi, being exceedingly young, nevertheless being large in stature, and also having great desires to know of the mysteries of God. So this is Nephi explaining about his younger self. Realize this was written probably 30 years after this happened. Nephi's writing down his experiences, and so now he's describing his own experience at the same time frame. He says, I did cry unto the Lord, and behold, he did visit me, and did soften my heart, that I did believe all the words which had been spoken by my father. Wherefore I did not rebel against him like unto my brothers. So this is Nephi taking a whole different approach to what his father's doing. Remember Laman and Lemuel, they basically had a hard heart. Nephi had a softer heart. See, there's that contrast. There's a good analogy and a contrast in that. So this is him saying that he sought God. He sought personal revelation to understand what God has been teaching his father. This is a very important principle for us to understand in life, okay? He didn't understand what his dad was saying at first. He didn't fully comprehend everything at first. But he believed his dad was true. He believed his dad was a good man and a man of God, and so I'm going to follow him as well. So he tries to put this together, but he seeks personal revelation. This is vital for us to understand. There is nothing in the gospel that God teaches his prophets that we cannot gain a personal testimony of. This is why if you look at LDS General Conference timeframes, usually the prophet is one of the last speakers, and oftentimes he'll make the comment that, in essence, you need to go home and pray about this stuff. Read the talks again, pray about them to know the truth of them. Gain your own testimony of what we're telling you. That's what Nephi did, is he sought his own personal witness of the truth of what his dad is telling him. He didn't just take his dad's word at face value and says, okay, my dad said it, so I'm just going to believe it. He sought God. This is a good thing for us to do. And we're going to see this over and over in Nephi's life. When his dad has revelations, Nephi goes and prays about him, to ask God about him. He's seeking his own testimony of him. This is the pattern we should be following in our life. Seeking to understand the will of God by talking with God. Now, this doesn't mean we supersede our leader's revelation, but we can understand what is it that leaders have been taught by God. How can we understand that message that was given to them by God that he wants them to convey to us? That is what it is. Seeking unity, a completion of the truth. Truth comes from God to Jesus, to angels, to prophets, to us, and then we go back to God to confirm it. We have a loop, a completeness of truth. And that's what Nephi is doing, and that's what we need to be doing in our life. So verse 17, and I spake unto Sam, making known unto him the things which the Lord had manifested unto me by the Holy Spirit. And it came to pass that he believed in my words. So Sam just went along with Nephi. He didn't seek his own witness. He just went along with Nephi because he believed and trusted in Nephi's testimony, which isn't bad, but Sam should have sought his own testimony. Hopefully he did. We just never got told about it. Verse 18, but behold, Laman and Lemuel would not hearken unto my words. So now he went and talked to Laman and Lemuel about what he gained a personal testimony of. And they're not listening to him either. He says, in fact, and being grieved because of the hardness of their hearts, I cried unto the Lord for them. So he's trying to pray in behalf of his brothers to help them out. Verse 19, and it came to pass that the Lord spake unto me, saying, blessed art thou, Nephi, because of thy faith, for thou hast sought me diligently with lowliness of heart. That's that soft heart, being willing to have that malleability, being willing to change, being willing to be flexible and adjust instead of hard-hearted, meaning not accepting new things, sticking with the old, not believing new ideas. Verse 20, continuing on with what the Lord is now saying to Nephi. And inasmuch as ye shall keep my commandments, ye shall prosper and shall be led to a land of promise, yea, even a land which I have prepared for you, yea, a land which is choice above all other lands. Now, if there is ever a phrase, a verse in the Book of Mormon that says, what is the point of the Book of Mormon? What's the main theme of the Book of Mormon? It's that one, verse 20. Okay, the goal of God is to lead his people who are following him to a promised land. Now we can see this literally with Lehi and his family. Lehi was faithful and in keeping the commandments, and so God has given him a blessing. Hey, you're going to leave Jerusalem. I'm going to lead you to a promised land where you can live and dwell and grow and have a better place, and you're not going to be destroyed by Jerusalem. But spiritually, we can look at this as well and say that God is wanting us to come to a promised land by following him. This is Zion. So metaphorically, so spiritually speaking and literally, we can see this happen in verse 20. And that is, again, that's the whole point of the Book of Mormon, to bring us to God, to have that connection with God, because that's what matters the most. The point of a church is to administer the teachings at scale to bring people to God. That's the point. Verse 21, and inasmuch as thy brethren shall rebel against thee, they shall be cut off from the presence of the Lord. So again, if you don't keep the commandments, you aren't close to God. You're moving away from God. And that's a self-fulfilling prophecy. The more you keep the commandments, the closer you come to God. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's just that's the pattern. It's how it works. Verse 22, and inasmuch as thou shalt keep my commandments, thou shalt be made a ruler and a teacher over thy brethren. Now, that's not going to make them happy because they're the older brothers. Therefore, they should have the birthright. They should have the right of leadership for the family. And God says, we're not following the traditional culture. We're following spirituality. This is played out with Joseph getting the birthright. Out of all the sons of Jacob, Joseph ends up getting the opportunity for birthright because he was the righteous one, not the oldest. He was the second to youngest, in fact. Even though he was the oldest of Rachel, Jacob's original first wife that he was hoping to have. But he's the one that was faithful, and so he got the birthright. We see this even in Jacob's life, in Esau, even though Esau technically had it, and Jacob convinced him to give it to him, in how Isaac blessed his sons and other things. And even in the whole message of the Old Testament, a lot of the Israelites would be like, oh, we're the chosen people of God, so God is on our side, not your side. And he's like, well, you are my chosen people, but you're only blessed when you are righteous. If you're not righteous, I'm not helping you. It's your righteousness that makes the distinction. It's not family connection that saves you. And that's what he's talking about here, basically, is Laman and Lemuel are not following me, therefore you are the one that's following me, so you're going to get that spiritual opportunity to be the leader, to guide the people, especially for the church, because I need people who are going to lead and follow God's plan. Verse 23, for behold, in that day that they shall rebel against me. So it's pretty much declared, yeah, they're going to rebel. I will curse them even with a sore curse, and they shall have no power over thy seed, except they shall rebel against me also. This is a theme that we see played out tons in the Book of Mormon as well. The Lamanites and the Nephites is what these two groups split into. The Nephites are the followers of Nephi. The Lamanites are the followers of Laman, the traditional leader of the family. And they split. The Nephites become righteous. The Lamanites go wicked, away from God, towards God. You see these themes and trends that are happening here. And oftentimes in the Book of Mormon, what happens is when the Nephites get lazy in their religion, the Lamanites attack. The Lamanites are stirred up in anger, usually by Nephites who aren't following the commandments, and then they attack. And then the Nephites remember, oh my gosh, yeah, we need to follow God. We've stopped following him. We need to seek repentance and forgiveness and things, and yes, help us, God. And then they suddenly get better, more spiritual, and then they win the battle against the Lamanites. That's usually, this thing happens so often, it's amazing in the Book of Mormon. They call it the pride cycle. It's part of that same pattern as well. But we're going to see this over and over again. So the Lamanites stir the Nephites to righteousness. So instead of, the prophets are trying to help the Nephites to willingly become righteous, but they stop doing that, and so they are compelled to righteousness by the Lamanites attacking them. And then they realize, I need God in my life. Kind of goes on that idea of there's no atheists in foxholes type concept. So verse 24, and if it so be that they rebel against me, they shall be a scourge unto thy seed to stir them up in the ways of remembrance. So again, the purpose of the Lamanites is to get the righteous to stay righteous. And the righteous are supposed to help the wicked to repent and become righteous. So these two groups help each other out, and the dynamic between them is how the religion evolves and adjusts and gets applied. And it's a fascinating concept that we see as we go through the scriptures, and it's still a concept that is active today. There's always an external influence on how the gospel gets applied that is designed to help us to remember we need to be better people. And so we need to be acknowledging and realizing that that's there. Opposition isn't always bad. If it helps us to follow God, then it's a good thing to have. So let's jump over to the next chapter as we continue the Book of Mormon.